I was 19 years old, sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday night in late January, working on a college application essay while a blizzard buried everything outside. My name is Persephone, and the next few hours would change every single thing about my life. Before I go any further, I want to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. And if you have ever been blamed for something you did not do by someone who was supposed to protect you, hit that like button right now because this story is for you. Subscribe if you are new here because the full story of what happened next, what my mother did, what the courts decided, and what became of the people who threw me out into the cold is all coming up. Stay with me. So let me take you back to that kitchen table. The house was a split level in suburban Ohio, the kind of house that looks perfectly normal from the outside. 2-car garage, a basketball hoop in the driveway that nobody had touched in years, a wreath on the front door that my mother had put up at Christmas and my father had never bothered to take down. Outside, a blizzard warning had been in effect since noon. The snow was already 2 feet deep on the driveway. The temperature was 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and with the wind chill cutting in from the northwest, it felt like -12. My mother, Vivienne, was away on a work trip to Cincinnati. She was not expected back until Tuesday. I had been at that table for nearly 4 hours. My laptop was open to a Google Doc. I had written and rewritten the same paragraph about why I wanted to study communications 3 separate times. I had a mug of cold coffee next to my elbow and a stack of notes from my community college coursework that I was using to frame my argument about media literacy. I was not in Odette's room. I was not on my phone. I was not doing anything except trying to build a future for myself in the only way I knew how, which was quietly and without any help from anyone in that house. I need to explain what that house was like before I tell you what happened, because if I skip that part, nothing that follows will make sense. My father, Gerald, was 51 years old and worked as a contractor. He was not a cruel man in the way that people sometimes imagine when they hear stories like mine. He was not violent every day. He did not wake up looking for someone to hurt. What he was, in the way that I think is actually more damaging over time, was completely and utterly consistent in who he chose to protect. And that person was never me. Odette was 22. She had dropped out of community college after 1 semester, citing reasons that changed depending on who she was talking to. She worked part-time at a nail salon 3 days a week and spent the rest of her time either out with her boyfriend Terence or on the couch watching television. She borrowed money from Gerald on a regular basis. She had never once, to my knowledge, paid any of it back. Gerald never asked her to. He never looked at her sideways when she came home at 2 in the morning. He never questioned where the money went. When Odette wanted something, the answer was usually yes, and when it was not yes immediately, it became yes within 48 hours. I, on the other hand, maintained a 3.8 grade point average. I worked part-time at a grocery store 15 hours a week. I paid for my own school supplies, my own transportation, my own anything that could be considered optional. I had saved money over 6 months to buy myself a proper winter coat the previous year. During that same period, Gerald had accused me without any evidence of stealing cash from his wallet. Nothing had been taken. He never apologized. He simply stopped mentioning it, which I was supposed to interpret as resolution. There was the time he missed my academic honors ceremony because Odette wanted someone to drive her to a concert 4 states away, and she did not want to take the bus. There was the time I received a small scholarship from a local civic organization, $150, and told him about it at dinner, and he said that is nice and changed the subject. 2 months later, when Odette received a temporary promotion at the nail salon, he bought her a cake from the good bakery downtown and invited 3 of his friends over to celebrate. I am not exaggerating any of this. I spent years wondering what was wrong with me that I could not earn the same category of response. It took me a long time in therapy to understand that the problem was never mine to solve. So that is the house I was sitting in on that Sunday night in January, trying to write an essay about my future, while the snow piled up outside and the wind shook the window frames. Odette came home around 9 in the evening. I heard the front door, heard her boots on the entryway floor, and then she walked past the kitchen without looking at me. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were already red at the corners. I registered all of this and turned back to my laptop because whatever was happening with Odette and Terence was not my business, and I had learned a long time ago that inserting myself into Odette's emotional weather systems never ended well for me. I heard her upstairs talking loudly, not the words, just the tone, The high, clipped cadence of someone arguing or performing anger for an audience of one. It went on for about 20 minutes, then it stopped. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Gerald came into the kitchen first. He had the look I had learned to read over 19 years, the one where his jaw was set forward and his eyes were already decided. Odette came in right behind him with her arms crossed over her chest and her eyes swollen and her chin trembling in exactly the way that had always worked on him. I felt the air in the room change. I closed my laptop halfway without thinking. Gerald stood at the edge of the kitchen and told me, without asking me a single question, that Odette had told him what I had done. I asked him what he meant. He said I had gone into Odette's room and stolen $80 from her nightstand drawer. He said I had taken Terrence's number from Odette's phone and texted him from a fake number to tell him that Odette had been cheating on him, which was what had caused the fight between them that evening. I sat very still for a moment. I want to describe what it feels like to be accused of something so specific and so completely untrue that your brain requires a few seconds just to process the architecture of the lie. It was not like being caught doing something wrong. It was like being handed a photograph of yourself somewhere you had never been and being told to explain it. I said I had not been in her room. I said I did not have Terrence's number. I said I had been sitting at this table working on this essay for 4 hours and I could prove it. I opened the laptop and turned it toward Gerald to show him the document timestamps. Gerald looked at the screen for approximately 1 second, then reached over, closed the laptop, and pushed it across the table. He said I was a jealous troublemaker. He said I had always resented Odette for having real friends and a real life. He said he was sick of my attitude and my manipulation, and that I needed to learn that there were consequences for what I had done. I said his name. I said it twice. I was trying to get him to slow down enough to actually hear me. He hit me across the face with an open hand. The sound was loud in the kitchen. I stumbled back into the counter behind me, knocking the mug of cold coffee off the edge. It shattered on the tile floor. I stood against the counter with my hand over my cheek and I looked at him and he was already reaching for me again. He grabbed my upper arm hard enough that I felt the grip all the way to my shoulder, dragged me through the kitchen and down the hall to the front door, pulled my coat off the hook and threw it at me, and shoved me out the front door. The cold hit me like a physical object. It was immediate and total. I heard the deadbolt slide home behind me. I was wearing jeans, a thin long-sleeve shirt, socks, sneakers. My coat was in my hands because he had thrown it at me, and I got it on with shaking fingers while standing on the porch. I did not have my phone. I did not have my wallet. I did not have my keys. I had the coat and the clothes I was standing in and the wind, which was coming hard from the northwest and had found every gap in what I was wearing within the first 30 seconds. I knocked on the door. I called out. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably closer to 30 seconds before I understood that Gerald had turned off the porch light and was not coming back to the door. I stepped off the porch into the snow. 8 city blocks. That is the distance between my father's house and the house with the green shutters on the corner of Millard and Crescent, where Leander lived with his grandparents. I want to describe those 8 blocks accurately because I think it matters. I think the specific physical reality of what happened that night is part of the record. The snow on the sidewalks was 8 inches deep in the flat sections and deeper where it had drifted against fences and parked cars. My sneakers soaked through completely within the first block. By the time I reached the end of the second block, I could feel the cold in my feet as a specific pain, sharp and radiating upward into my ankles. By the third block, the pain had shifted into numbness, which I knew even at the time was a worse sign than the pain had been. The wind was coming directly into my face. My ears burned, my cheekbones burned. My fingers inside my coat pockets went stiff somewhere around the 4th block in a way that made me think of frozen meat, which was not a productive thought, so I stopped having it. I passed 2 houses with lights on in the windows, warm yellow rectangles in the dark. I considered knocking both times. Both times I kept walking. I do not fully understand why even now. Some combination of shame and disorientation and the particular stubbornness that had kept me functional in that house for 19 years. Some part of me that was not ready to explain myself to a stranger. By the 6th block I was moving slower than I realized. There was a set of concrete steps leading up to a front door, and I had a very clear and specific desire to sit down on those steps. Not to rest exactly. Maury liked to simply stop. I understood, somewhere underneath the cold and the exhaustion, that sitting down was not an option. I kept walking. I recognized the green shutters from half a block away. Leander and I had been in the same introductory writing seminar at community college for 2 semesters. We were not close in the way that required regular contact. We studied in the same corner of the library sometimes. We had been in the same group for a research project the previous fall, and I had driven him home afterward because he had taken the bus to school that day and it was raining. I knew the green shutters because I had glanced at his house when I dropped him off and registered it the way you register small details about people you might want to know better someday. I knocked on the door. Leander opened it. He was wearing sweatpants and a grey hoodie with the sleeves pushed up, and he looked at me for about 1 full second before he reached out and pulled me inside by the arm, the same arm Gerald had grabbed, though Leander's grip was entirely different. It was the grip of someone catching something before it falls. His grandfather, Clarence Miller, was in the armchair by the fireplace. His grandmother, Dorothea Miller, was on the couch with a book open in her lap. She had it closed and was on her feet before the door was fully shut behind me. I remember the smell of the room, wood smoke from the fireplace, something warm and spiced that had been cooking earlier in the evening, cedar from a closet somewhere nearby. Dorothea pressed a quilt around my shoulders, the kind that smells like it has been stored with cedar blocks and washed every season for 20 years. Clarence moved from his chair to the edge of the couch without a word and sat near enough that I understood he was there. Leander went to the kitchen. He came back with a mug of chamomile tea and put it in my hands. My fingers were not working well enough to grip it properly at first. He wrapped his hands around mine and held the mug steady until I could hold it myself. I stopped shaking somewhere around the second mug of tea. Dorothea asked me what had happened. She asked in the way that made it clear she wanted the actual answer, not a softened version. I told her. She asked specific follow-up questions, the kind that built a clear chronology. What time did Odette come home? What exactly did Gerald say? What did he do? I answered every question. Clarence had found a notepad on the side table and was writing things down. Leander, who was in his 2nd year of a pre-law track, sat across from me on the coffee table and said that before the bruising on my face and my arm faded any further, he needed to ask me something. He asked if I was willing to let him take photographs of my injuries. I said yes. He took photographs on his phone, time-stamped, of the contusion on my left cheek, where Gerald's hand had landed, and the bruising along my upper arm, where Gerald had gripped me hard enough to drag me down a hallway. Dorothea documented the condition of my clothing and shoes in writing, noting the full saturation of my sneakers and the damage to my fingers. Clarence picked up the phone and called the non-emergency police line. 2 officers arrived 40 minutes later. Officer Brenda Calloway and her partner Officer Davis Ruiz. Officer Calloway was thorough and direct. She examined the photographs, noted the visible injuries, and took my full statement while Officer Ruiz took notes. Then they drove to the family home and spoke with Gerald at the door. Gerald told them I had left voluntarily after a disagreement. He described it as a family matter that had been resolved. Officer Calloway came back to the Miller's house afterward and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She told me that Gerald's account had been noted. She told me that because I was 19 and legally an adult, the immediate intervention options were limited. Then she slid a piece of paper across the table with the report number written on it in blue ink. She said, "What was documented tonight is a record. It does not disappear." I slept that night in Dorothea's sewing room under 3 quilts with the wind working at the windows from outside. I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and felt something happening in my chest that I did not have words for yet. It was not peace. It was not relief. It was something older and quieter than either of those. It felt like the moment before you decide to stop waiting for someone to come get you and start walking on your own. The next morning, Leander handed me his phone and I called my mother. Vivienne answered on the 2nd ring. I heard her voice and something I had been holding together since the night before came slightly undone. My voice broke twice while I was telling her what happened. She did not interrupt me. She did not ask me to repeat myself. She said, "I am leaving right now. I will be there by 10. She called her colleague to cover the rest of her obligations in Cincinnati. She was on the road by 7 in the morning, driving nearly 3 hours through roads that were still clearing from the previous night's storm. She pulled up in front of the Miller's house at 9:52. She came through the door and looked at my face. She stood in the entryway of Clarence and Dorothea's home with her coat still on and looked at the photographs on Leander's phone that he held out to her. Then she sat down at the kitchen table. She did not take her coat off. She thanked Clarence and Dorothea in a voice that was very level and very quiet. Then she asked to see the police report number. She took her planner out of her bag and wrote it down in the margin of that day's page, in the small, neat handwriting she had used for every list and every note I had ever seen her write. Precise, deliberate, the handwriting of someone who understood that the record mattered. She drove me to the emergency room at Mercy Regional. The attending physician was a man named Dr. Weston Albright. He was methodical and kind. He documented the contusion on my left cheek, the bruising along my upper arm consistent with forceful gripping, and early signs of frostnip affecting the two smallest toes on my right foot and 2 fingers on my left hand. He asked me twice, in a tone that was careful and unhurried, whether I felt safe at home. I said no both times. He wrote that down. A hospital social worker named Patricia Owens came to the room while we were waiting for discharge paperwork. She sat with Vivienne and me together and asked questions about the household. She provided a resource packet and made a note in the hospital system flagging the case. She told me that what I had described was not a family argument. She said it plainly, the way you say something that you want a person to actually hear. We left the hospital with a copy of the medical documentation and drove to the family home. Gerald opened the door. He started talking immediately, the way he always did when he knew he was on unstable ground. He said that Vivienne needed to understand what had been happening in the house while she was away. He said I had been causing problems. He said the previous night had gotten out of hand, but that I had pushed it there. He said he had done what any father would do when a daughter was destructive and dishonest. Vivienne walked past him into the living room. Odette was on the couch. She was dressed and composed, which told me she had known we were coming. She had that specific arrangement on her face that she used when she was preparing to hold a position. Vivienne did not sit down. She set her bag on the coffee table and took out 3 things: the printed medical report, the printed copy of the police report number and Officer Calloway's documented account, the photographs from Leander's phone, which he had texted to Vivienne that morning and which she had printed at the pharmacy on the way across town. She laid them on the coffee table one at a time. Then she looked at Odette and said, "Explain this to me." Odette held the story for approximately 90 seconds. She said Persephone had been in her room. She said the money was gone. She said she had every reason to believe what she told their father. Vivienne let her finish. Then Vivienne began. The essay document on my laptop had a creation timestamp and an autosave history that placed me at that table from 5 in the afternoon until the moment Gerald closed it. Vivienne had checked it before we left the house. My phone records, which Vivienne had requested from the carrier that morning, showed no outgoing calls or texts from my number between noon and 9:30 that evening. The $80 that Odette had claimed was stolen from her nightstand drawer was still in the drawer. Vivienne had gone upstairs and checked before we came downstairs to confront them. Odette looked at the table. Gerald said Vivienne was overreacting. He said she was looking for reasons to make a problem where there was none. Vivienne turned to him and said 3 words in a tone I had never heard from her before. She said, "Do not speak, not loudly, not with any trembling or heat," just 3 words in a register that was so completely certain of itself that Gerald stopped talking mid-breath. Odette started crying, the real kind this time, or something close enough to it that the difference did not matter. She said she had been upset about a fight with Terence and she had not been thinking clearly. She said she had not meant for it to go as far as it did. She said she did not think Gerald would actually open the front door. Whether or not that last part was true, I will never know for certain. I have spent a long time deciding that I do not need to know. Vivienne listened to all of it. Then she told Gerald to pack a bag for 2 weeks. She told him she would be filing for legal separation the following morning and that he should retain an attorney. She told Odette that Odette was 22 years old and had made an adult decision and would be living with Gerald because Vivienne was not going to house someone who had been willing to see her daughter injured in order to avoid a difficult conversation with a boyfriend. Gerald raised his voice. He told Vivienne she was destroying their family over nothing. Vivienne took her phone out of her coat pocket, unlocked it, and held it up. She said she had Officer Calloway's direct contact number and she would use it if he was not out of the house within 30 minutes. He left in 22. I stood at the front window and watched his truck back out of the driveway. The brake lights made red shapes on the snow at the end of the block. I watched until the truck turned the corner and disappeared. What I felt was not triumph. It was not relief. It was something that had no clean name, something that lived in the same neighborhood as grief, because even when the thing that hurt you is finally gone, there is a moment where the space it occupied feels strange and large, and you do not yet know what you are going to do with it. Word traveled the way it always does in a community college environment, which is faster than it should, and with less accuracy than anyone involved would later claim. I was not sure of the exact mechanism. I did not know who told whom first or what version was circulating in which direction. What I knew was that within 2 weeks of returning to campus, something had shifted in the social architecture around me. A study group I had been part of for an entire semester stopped including me in the group chat. Not explicitly. The chat simply went quiet, and then I realized the messages were still happening somewhere I was not. A classmate named Greta Holloway, who had always been pleasant to me in the easy way of people who are pleasant to everyone, pulled me aside near the library entrance one afternoon and told me, in a low voice that suggested she understood she was delivering information that would sting, that Odette had been telling people on campus that Persephone had fabricated the entire story to get their father in trouble after losing an argument. That Persephone had manufactured a conflict to punish her family, that the injuries in this telling were either exaggerated or self-inflicted. I thanked Greta. I went to my next class. I sat in a seat that had been very deliberately not saved for me, and I took notes for the full hour without speaking to anyone. The social coldness I could manage. What happened next was harder. That semester, I had been selected as one of 3 students from our campus to participate in a regional academic writing competition. The selection required a faculty nomination and a letter of departmental support. It was the kind of opportunity I had spent 2 years working toward, and I had received the nomination the previous month before any of this happened, from a professor in the communications department who had read 2 of my papers and described them as among the strongest undergraduate work she had encountered. 2 weeks after the campus gossip began circulating, the faculty coordinator for the competition, Professor Whitmore, called me into her office. She sat across from me at her desk with her hands folded on top of a folder, and she told me with visible discomfort that the department had decided to move forward with a different student. She cited concerns about my current home situation creating instability. She used the word instability 3 times. She did not look at me directly for most of the conversation. When I asked if this decision was based on my academic work, she said that my academic work was not in question. When I asked what it was based on, she repeated the word instability. She did not say she thought it was fair. She did not pretend it was. She did it anyway, which in some ways made it worse than if she had simply been indifferent. I walked out of her office and through the building and across the parking lot to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes without starting the engine. The campus around me was doing its ordinary afternoon things, students cutting across the quad, someone's music coming faintly from a window on the 2nd floor of the science building. I sat with the weight of it, which was the weight of understanding that the damage Odette's lie had caused was not limited to one night. It had spread outward in ways that would take time to map. I drove home. I did not cry in the car. I saved that for later when I was in my room with the door closed and Vivienne was in the kitchen and could not hear me. The legal process began the morning after Gerald left the house, when Vivienne walked into the office of a family law attorney named Mr. Hargrove and retained him before 9 in the morning. She had a folder with her that contained everything: the medical report, the police report documentation, the phone records, the time-stamped photographs, Odette's confession as witnessed by both Gerald and Vivienne. It took 9 months. Gerald contested the separation. His attorney argued that the incident was an isolated lapse in judgment by a man under household stress, that Vivienne's work travel had left Gerald managing a difficult domestic situation without support, that Persephone, as a legal adult, had not been a child in Gerald's care, and therefore the legal framework for parental physical discipline, such as it was in Ohio, applied differently. The argument was creative. Mr. Hargrove was better. He presented the full medical documentation from Dr. Albright, including the Frostnip findings and the documented statement that Persephone did not feel safe at home. He presented Officer Calloway's testimony. He presented Odette's confession, which Gerald had witnessed without disputing at the time it was made. Gerald's attorney argued that a private verbal confession carried limited evidentiary weight. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Marsh, reviewed the totality of the documentation and found that argument unpersuasive. Vivienne was awarded full legal and physical custody of Persephone, which was partly symbolic given that I was 19, but which accomplished something concrete in establishing the legal record of what had happened in that house. Gerald was ordered to pay spousal support for 3 years. He lost the family home in the asset division because the house had been purchased with money from Vivienne's family inheritance, a fact that his attorney had apparently not researched adequately before the proceedings began. A 2-year protective order was issued prohibiting Gerald from coming within 100 feet of me. Odette moved into Gerald's new apartment, a 2-bedroom rental in a town about 20 minutes away. She was 22 years old with a part-time job at a nail salon and no savings, and a father who had never held her accountable for anything in her life. I thought about that sometimes, not with satisfaction exactly, but with a kind of grim clarity about what the future probably looked like for both of them. I was not in the courthouse when Judge Marsh issued the final ruling. I was at the grocery store where I had worked for 2 years, bagging a woman's Thanksgiving groceries, while she told me about her daughter who was coming home from college for the first time since September. I was nodding and saying the right things when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I checked it between customers. One word from Vivienne, stunned. I put my phone back in my pocket and finished the woman's bags and told her to have a good holiday. The semester after Professor Whitmore removed me from the writing competition, I found a national program that accepted essay submissions directly from students, no faculty nomination required. I submitted the same essay I had been working on the night of the blizzard, the one about media literacy and the way information travels through communities before anyone has thought to verify it. I revised it 4 times over 3 months. I was accepted into the program in March. This did not undo what Professor Whitmore had done. It did not restore the opportunity that had been taken from me. What it did was confirm something I needed confirmed, which was that the quality of my work had never been the issue. The issue had been something entirely outside my work, and while I could not control what other people chose to do with gossip, I could control what I did with my time and my capability. I transferred to a 4-year university the following fall. My new financial aid advisor, a woman named Constance Briggs, spent an hour and a half with me going through every available scholarship, grant, and institutional support program I qualified for. She found 3 sources of funding I would not have located on my own. Between the academic merit scholarship and the need-based grant Constance helped me access, I was able to cover the full cost of my first year without loans. At the 4-year school, I was simply a transfer student. Nobody knew my family. Nobody knew about the night of the blizzard or the 9 months of legal proceedings or the professor who had pulled my name from a competition because of a word she used 3 times. I was a person with strong writing and a habit of arriving early and working longer than the assignment required. That was all anyone needed to know. My closest friend at the new school was a woman named Waverly Dunn, who was studying environmental science and who had her own complicated family history that she referenced occasionally and never elaborated on unless it was directly relevant. We became the kind of friends who could go 3 weeks without contact and pick up exactly where we left off. When something mattered, Waverly showed up. When I needed someone to sit with me without talking, she sat. When I needed someone to tell me directly that I was being too hard on myself, she said it. That was the whole of it, and it was sufficient. Through the University Counseling Center, I began working with a therapist named Dr. Anita Reeves, who specialized in family trauma. I want to describe therapy accurately because I think people sometimes expect it to function as a series of revelations, moments where something clicks into place and rearranges everything. It was not like that. It was mostly slow and repetitive, the way physical therapy is slow and repetitive. It was learning to notice the specific way my body responded when someone raised a hand near my face. It was learning to sit in a room without automatically identifying the exits. It was learning to let someone be kind to me without waiting for the condition attached to the kindness. The work with Dr. Reeves took years. I am still at certain moments engaged in it. Leander transferred to the same 4-year university 1 year after me. He had been accepted into a law degree program. We had stayed in contact throughout my first year, texting regularly, talking on the phone on Sunday evenings, studying together during holiday breaks back in Ohio at his grandparents' kitchen table, while Dorothea made coffee and Clarence read the newspaper, and the 4 of us existed in the same space in the easy way of people who trust each other. The shift from friendship to something more did not happen in a single moment. I cannot point to a night or a conversation or a specific sentence that changed the category. What I can say is that there was a period of several months during Leander's first year at the university where I noticed that the Sunday phone calls had gotten longer and that I was saving things up during the week, observations and small stories and thoughts that felt incomplete until I had told them to him. I noticed that when he walked into a room where I already was, something in me that had been slightly tensed released. He noticed the same thing. He said so one evening in November, sitting across from me at a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus, both of us supposedly working on separate assignments. He did not make a production of it. He just said it plainly, the way he said most things. I put down my pen. We talked for 2 hours about something that had apparently been true for a while and that we had both simply been allowing to find its own timing. Clarence and Dorothea Miller came to my graduation. Dorothea wore a coral blazer and cried during the processional. Clarence shook my hand with both of his and then pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any handshake. Gerald was not there. Odette was not there. Vivienne was there in a green dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and she stood on the lawn afterward in the May sunshine with Leander's grandparents and took photographs of the 4 of us, and the photographs came out well. I graduated 3rd in my class with a bachelor's degree in communications. I was offered a position at a content strategy firm in Portland, Oregon. Leander had been accepted to a law school in the same city. We packed our combined belongings into a rented truck on a Wednesday in August and drove west together over 4 days, staying in motels that cost $60 a night and eating breakfast at diners and listening to the same playlist until we had both memorized the order of every song. The night before we left Ohio, Vivienne made dinner at the house. The same house, repainted in a soft sage green that she had chosen herself, with new curtains in the kitchen that let more light in than the old ones. The 3 of us sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked about Portland and about Leander's first-year curriculum and about a recipe Vivienne had been trying to master. Nobody mentioned Gerald. Nobody mentioned Odette. The absence of those names was not something we had to work at. It was simply accurate. It was the sound of a house that had become, at last, the right size for the people living in it. 4 years after Leander and I moved to Portland, my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon with a number I recognized as belonging to my Aunt Norma, who was my father's older sister, and who had always occupied a neutral position in the family in the way that some relatives do, present at holidays, careful with her words, sending birthday cards that arrived exactly on time. She told me that Gerald had died of a heart attack. He was 58 years old. He had been found by a neighbor who noticed that his mail had been accumulating for several days. The neighbor had knocked and then called the building manager, and the building manager had called emergency services. Gerald had been alone in the apartment for what the medical examiner estimated was between 36 and 48 hours before he was found. Odette had not been in regular contact with him for over a year. I sat with this information for several days. I did not know what I had expected to feel. I had thought about Gerald's death before, not in a wishing way. Just in the way that you occasionally think about the end point of things that have caused you significant harm. I had imagined a clean, sharp feeling, something that resolved like the last note of a piece of music. What I actually felt was quieter and less defined than that. It was the feeling of a sound you had been hearing for so long that you stopped registering it as noise, and then one day it stops, and the silence is not peaceful exactly, just different. Just the absence of something that had been part of the background of your life for as long as you could remember. Vivienne called that evening. She did not tell me what to do. She said she was sorry in the way that people say it when they mean something complicated by it. I said I knew. Leander did not tell me what to do either. He sat on the couch next to me that night with his arm around my shoulders and the television on low, and he said he would come with me if I wanted to go and stay in Portland if I wanted to stay, and that whichever I chose was the right choice because I was the only person qualified to make it. I decided to go, not for Gerald, not because I felt I owed him a witness. I went because Aunt Norma had always been kind to me in small and consistent ways, and because I wanted to close this door properly. I had learned the hard way that the doors you walk away from without closing properly have a way of coming open again when the weather changes. Leander and I flew back to Ohio on a Friday. The funeral was held at a small chapel in the town where I had grown up, a white clapboard building on a street lined with oak trees that had been bare and grey the last time I saw them and were still bare and grey now in the November cold. There were fewer than 20 people in attendance. I recognized some of them and did not recognize others. I did not go inside. I stood in the parking lot for the full duration of the service. Leander stood beside me with his hands in his coat pockets. We did not talk much. The cold was dry and still, completely unlike the wet driving cold of the blizzard night, and I noticed this difference and held it in my mind for a moment, the distance between that night and this one, and what had been built in the space between them. People filtered out of the chapel after about 40 minutes. I watched them come through the door in small groups, speaking in low voices, moving toward their cars. I recognized a contractor who had worked with Gerald years ago. I recognized a couple who had lived 2 streets over from our house. I did not feel any pull to approach them. Then I saw Odette. She came through the chapel door alone and stood on the front steps for a moment before she looked across the parking lot and found me. She looked older than I had expected, which was not a criticism, just an observation. She was wearing a black wool coat, and her hair was shorter than it had been the last time I had seen her. There was something around her eyes that had not been there before, a kind of wearing down that I recognized as belonging to people who have spent time living with consequences they did not anticipate. She crossed the parking lot toward me. She stopped a few feet away. She said she had been wanting to say this for a long time. She said she was sorry. She said she had been selfish and immature, and that she had not meant for things to go the way they did, and that she had regretted that night every single day since it happened. She said she had been in therapy for 2 years, and that her therapist had encouraged her to make amends with the people she had hurt. She said she did not expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know that she understood what she had done and what it had cost me. She asked, in a voice that was careful and small, if there was any possibility of rebuilding something between them. I listened to all of it without interrupting her. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to hear it completely before I responded. Then I said, I believe you are sorry. I believe the regret is real and I am not dismissing it. I have done my own work. I have spent time in therapy too, and I have come to an understanding of forgiveness that does not require me to share it with you directly. I have forgiven what happened in the way that allowed me to stop carrying it as a daily weight. That forgiveness belongs to me. It is not a door I am opening between us. I told her I hoped she built a life she was proud of. I meant it. I said I was not going to be part of that life. I said it without anger. I want to be clear about that. There was no heat in it. It was the same kind of clear and specific language you use when you are closing a window before a storm. Not aggressive, just accurate, just final. Odette nodded. Her eyes filled and she pressed her lips together. She turned and walked back across the parking lot. I watched her get into a blue sedan near the chapel entrance. I watched the sedan pull out onto the street and disappear. Leander and I drove to a diner in a town about 20 minutes away. It was the kind of diner that has been in the same building for 40 years and has the same laminated menus it has always had, and a counter with swivel stools and a window along the front that looks out onto a 2-lane main street. We took a booth by the window. A waitress named Denise brought us coffee without being asked, which felt like exactly the right thing. I ordered eggs and toast. Leander ordered the same. The coffee was strong and the eggs came out fast, and we sat in that booth for a long time, talking about things that had nothing to do with the chapel or the parking lot. We talked about a hiking trail outside Portland that we had been planning to try since August. We talked about a book Leander had been reading for a law seminar and the argument it made about restorative justice. We talked about Waverly, who had recently been hired by an environmental nonprofit in Seattle, and Dorothea, who had taken up watercolor painting and was, by her own admission, only slightly better than she had been when she started. I looked out the window at the Ohio sky, which was grey and wide and completely familiar, in the way that the landscape of your childhood is always familiar, even when you have moved 1,000 miles from it. I thought about the girl who had walked 8 blocks in -12 wind chill, with no phone and no keys and no wallet and no certainty about what came next. I thought about Dorothea's cedar-scented quilt and Clarence's notepad and Leander's hands steadying the mug until I could hold it myself. I thought about Vivienne's handwriting in the planner, small and precise, writing down the report number like it was the most important thing she had written all year, which it was. I thought about Constance Briggs and the hour and a half she had spent finding me money I would not have found alone. I thought about Waverly in the next chair over, not asking unnecessary questions. I thought about Dr. Reeves and the slow, repetitive, unglamorous work of learning to stop flinching. I thought about the apartment in Portland, the one with the south-facing window where I had installed a window box in the spring and planted basil, rosemary and thyme. The basil was doing reasonably well. The rosemary was doing extremely well. The thyme was doing whatever it wanted, which was its right. I thought about all of it, the full span of it, the distance from that kitchen table to this diner booth, and what it had cost to travel it and what it had given me in return. Then I drank my coffee and talked about something else. That is the whole story. Living well is not a dramatic ending. It does not arrive with music or a moment of revelation that crystallizes everything into meaning. It is a diner booth and a cup of strong coffee and a conversation about hiking trails and a window box where the time does whatever it wants. It is the accumulation of every person who showed up without being obligated to, and every day you chose to move forward anyway, and the quiet fact that the people who threw you out into the cold are no longer anywhere near the warmth you built for yourself. That turned out to be enough. It turned out to be more than enough. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you were blamed for something you did not do by someone in your own family? Or have you ever had to make the decision to close a door on a person who hurt you, even when they finally said they were sorry? Tell me in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know what you did and how it turned out. Your story might be exactly what someone else reading these comments needs to hear tonight. If this story reached something in you, please hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more people find this channel and these stories. If you are new here and you want to hear more stories like this one, real and complicated and honest, please subscribe. And if you know someone who has been through something like this, someone who is still carrying the weight of being the one who was blamed, please share this with them. Sometimes the most useful thing one person can do for another is hand them a story that says, "You are not alone in this, and there is a life on the other side of it." Thank you for spending this time with me. You did not have to stay until the end, and you did. That means something. Take care of yourself out there, and I will see you in the next one.